Good evening. George Osborne isn't looking like a man who's planning to compromise, whether he is or not. Today he signalled his determination to save £20 billion in the next 4 years and no quarter. He's looking for lots of low-hanging fruit. Some departments like health and defence are being shielded, but unprotected departments are going to have to suggest two scenarios for budget cuts, either severe, 25%, or extremely severe, 40%. And ministers have got to come up with some radical ideas. He wants to go down in history as the Chancellor, and perhaps eventually the Prime Minister, who eliminated the deficit in the public finances. Here's our policy editor, Chris Cook.
Some of the details of how the British state will be trimmed back over the next 5 years have started to emerge.
And when it comes to building a Britain that lives within its means, we now need to finish the job. I am today launching the spending review. It will support our priorities like the National Health Service and national security. Other areas will have to make savings, but we've shown that with careful management of public money, we can get more for less and give working people real control over the decisions that affect them and their communities. The spending review will deliver better government and economic security, and the results will be announced to this House on the 25th of November.
In a document released by the Treasury, it was revealed that some departments have been asked to model 25% and 40% savings in real terms by 2019-20. The Treasury was seeking more changes to the welfare budget to make it more affordable. And it was looking for more money from cutting avoidance and tax planning. Now, the purpose of modelling those cuts is so that Whitehall can work out which departments which aren't getting protected can best bear the load of forthcoming cuts. And the Resolution Foundation estimates that unprotected departments face an average cut of 31% over the next 5 years. But this process isn't going to be shorn of all politics.
The officials will have been working on this process for the best part of a year. They'll have a whole swathe of different options in every part of the department, from big cuts to small cuts. They'll put those up to the minister to consider, and the minister's then got a choice. He can either put forward the easy, nice, safe cuts to make the centre of government think that he's the good boy in the class, and it's mostly a he, or he can put forward the most difficult set of cuts and proposals in order to prove that his department can't possibly bear the brunt of cuts.
Distributing the cuts evenly wouldn't have an even impact. They would imply a 75% cut for transport between 2009 and 2020, 55% for the justice system, which is already creaking. For local government, which provides social care, the result would be a 65% cut over 10 years.
For councils, a 40% cut in funding on top of the 40% cut that happened in the last Parliament would be an enormous challenge. That equates to £12.5 billion on top of an existing £20 billion cut. The Prime Minister's recognised that councils are the most efficient part of the public sector, and by looking at the ways in which we can use devolution to make sure we get ahead of some of the problems that we face, particularly when it comes to caring for frail elderly people, where the funding gap is increasing at a rate of £700 million a year, we can get ahead of some of those things before they reach crisis point.
There's a huge amount of pressure on the social care budget because there are more and more older people with more and more complex health conditions living for years and years, and they cost a lot of money to look after. We've already seen the government delay the cap on care costs because of the pressure of affordability there. Meanwhile, over in the Ministry of Defence, in my view, there's still quite a lot of slack, but the government's already committed not to make big cuts in defence and meet the 2% NATO target on defence spending, basically because the backbenchers insisted.
These arguments are now beginning inside Whitehall. Still, at least the politics are simpler now than they were under the coalition.
It's much simpler this time, because instead of it being a competition between Lib Dems and Conservatives as to who takes the big cuts, it's really all about who's more powerful within the Conservative Party and who wants George Osborne to really like them by making his life easy.
All of that, however, may be little consolation to public employees and the public who rely on them. Lots of them now face some very deep spending cuts.
Chris Cook will hear with me now our former number 10 advisors who know a thing or two about these things and how they work. Sean Worth from the Conservatives and John McTernan from Labour. First of all, Sean Worth, any surprises, do you think? Any things that perhaps the Liberal Democrats stymied you from doing last time around you'll be able to fly through?
Well, the main thing is that Liberal Democrats aren't stuck in departments that need to be protected in order to preserve their political reasons for being. Well, possibly, I don't know. But yeah, the main thing is that there will be another round of cuts. This will be a Conservative agenda. The budget, I think, set out a very clear route for that, and there won't be political horse trading for positions in
that way. But I mean, it's kind of smoke and mirrors, isn't it? Because George Osborne knows exactly what he wants to cut, doesn't he? Or he should do.
The process is generally pretty open. As we saw today, there's a briefing that government departments have been asked to get between 25 and 40% cuts. The Treasury always does this, every spending review, regardless of whether it's an austerity budget. Previous Labour budgets, they did this. And departments usually react quite defensively, but they have the onus on them this time is that
it's a dance because it comes down to about 20%.
It's a negotiating position.
So do you think that George Osborne's been radical enough here, John McTernan?
No, he's not. There's plenty of things he could do. He could halve the prison population. That would save loads of money. He could merge the fire service with the police service.
Oh, that would be unpopular.
Firefighters spend 2% of their time actually fighting fires. There's no fires anymore. What they do instead is they do fire alarms in houses.
This is something that a Blair agenda could have done and didn't do, isn't it?
The fire's been falling massively. We could have done that, but we had other things to do. But you could do that. You could force all councils to give their houses to housing associations, so therefore no borrowing for social housing beyond the books. There's lots and lots of things.
And these are not things that you, as a former Labour advisor, would necessarily attack.
There's plenty of stuff. It depends what your will is. And the thing about the dance you're talking about is, in all honesty, George Osborne knows the cuts he wants. He's making them dance. He's like putting,
yeah, I mean, when you say it's a dance, this is not about George Osborne pursuing the idea of small government, isn't it? It's not going to be any smaller. He could go for that. That would be a radical agenda.
Government will get smaller over time. It has to. The public sector will shrink. The logical thing is for Whitehall to get slimmer and smaller, and I imagine it probably will. There aren't Liberal Democrats stuffed in departments, begging for a reason to exist anymore.
Oh, ouch!
There are departments that stick out to I think any objective observer that probably could be merged or slimmed at least. Obviously, DCMS.
You would nix DCMS.
DCMS, you could.
Yes.
The best of what it does could be done by the Treasury really effectively.
Well, let's deal with that.
Really effectively.
That's interesting. Let's look at those two then. That's BIS and DCMS.
I'd get rid of DEFRA too. Agriculture is 2% of GDP. Why does it need its own department? Honestly, why have environment separate from climate change? You could do some really radical things.
That's interesting because, of course, what everybody thinks, of course, is that the Chancellor's agenda is all about welfare. But actually, that's because that the focus is on that. But actually, something much more radical like that. What would it actually save though to kill DEFRA?
It doesn't save you initially a lot of money. What it does save you is a vested interest at the heart of government. The NFU would lose their sponsor department, who actually probably waste a lot of money. There's probably a lot of money wasted in agriculture.
Is this the kind of conversation that's likely to be going, or is it going to be much more lily-livered?
Well, the idea that this is radical, I mean, it's not radical. The idea of squeezing departments and cutting departments that have probably run out of
but I mean, all this slicing, salami slicing, is hopeless, isn't it?
But remember, no party coming into this election at this next budget had a mandate for really radical public service reform, which is where the savings would come from if anybody had set that out. No party has a mandate to do that, including the current one. But what you're calling radical, scrapping government department responsibilities, I don't think the public would see that as radical. They'd see that as probably a quite nice efficiency saving. So if the government does choose to do something like that, I mean, I doubt it would even barely make the news, apart from on the day. The really difficult stuff in terms of cutting the cost of government are to do with healthcare, which I think will be very, very difficult to do. And that, I mean, it's right that budget is protected, but that's a growing area of demand, and that budget will have to go further, regardless of the fact that they're protecting it. But everywhere else, I mean, I don't think there's a great justification for leaving things as they are.
Do you think he's been far too mindful of Labour's problems?
I think that the Chancellor is playing games. So he claims to be a centrist because that annoys the Labour Party. You published an article in The Guardian that annoys the Labour Party. I think what he wants is to have a legacy of a low-tax economy, a small state, low-tax, small state. That wasn't in the manifesto of the Tory party. There isn't a mandate for it. There's a political opportunity to do that and to force the consensus to the centre-right. The fact he's not doing that is interesting, and I think he's more enjoying spooking the Labour Party than actually doing something quite radical with government.
No, I think he will have to reduce government. I mean, today he was talking about 20 billion being taken out of government departments. It will be fairly radical. I don't know if the end solutions will be that radical, but there will be quite big cuts. But the political issue is that the Labour Party haven't come up with any, not a party political point, but they literally don't have any solutions for making government leaner, more productive, more efficient, or even more progressive.
Why has that thinking not been done under Ed Miliband's leadership?
Well, Chris Leslie did quite a lot as Chief Secretary, actually, did a zero-based budgeting review, and some of the ideas that we've talked about now have, I know, been discussed.
But they weren't in the Labour manifesto.
They weren't in the Labour manifesto.
You know, I mean, so they might have been discussed, but they were obviously regarded as being too dangerous.
But the Labour Party was committed to reducing public spending, and there were emblematic policies in there. Whoever becomes leader of the Labour Party, unless in the unlikely event that Jeremy Corbyn becomes leader, they'll have to have a realistic package on public spending, a realistic package on welfare, a realistic package on the economy, which includes all of those things. And so the radical thinking may well have to come from the Labour Party, which may well be a surprise, but also quite good for politics.
Well, yes, well, thank you. Stay with us, John, because just before we came on air, we got news of an astonishing poll of the Labour leadership election. Allegra has just arrived, and right now she has some of the details. I mean, tell me.
Right, so it looks like on first prep we knew that Jeremy Corbyn was doing quite well.
Yep.
It looks like from the Times' poll today with YouGov that Jeremy Corbyn on first preferences. One poll, but he's ahead. Our number crunchers in the Newsnight office that me and you take very seriously.
Yep.
He's ahead by a ginormous amount that even they take seriously. He looks like he's ahead. You've actually
Okay, I've got the figures. So basically on the first round, in the YouGov poll, and John McTernan is still with us. On the first round, Jeremy Corbyn's got 43%, Andy Burnham 26%,
ginormous.
Yvette Cooper 20%, Liz Kendall
now,
11%.
The important thing to say about the vagaries of the Labour leadership poll is that everybody assumed that this perhaps could happen, but what the shakedown would eventually be over the course of the contest is that all the second and third preferences would eventually mean that Jeremy Corbyn came second or third. What we're seeing this evening is that actually you have
in the
numbers.
runoff.
Yep.
So the runoff here means that in the end, what you would have would be a race, obviously, between Jeremy Corbyn, Andy Burnham, and Corbyn will be on 53%,
yeah.
and Andy Burnham on 47%.
This latter figure, the actual eventual result, is scary for the Labour Party, for some of the Labour people I've spoken to this evening, and no John McTernan will say this, because no one thought, at the end of the day, Jeremy Corbyn would come first. The number the Times newspaper has this morning, or this evening and tomorrow morning, has him ahead. Now, this last number is the margin of error, so that's a bit squeaky. The first number, which is first preference, it's not squeaky at all. No. He is ahead by a country mile. Now, Labour people I've spoken to this evening say this is a necessary part of the process.
Shaking it down.
Labour people need to focus. They need to look at these numbers and think, do we want him to lead our party? And they think over the fullness of time, remember this person's not elected till September. Labour activists will go, oh, actually, I'm not sure I do actually want him.
So thank you very much
I'm
indeed.
not sure that's clear.
Well, let's just put this to John. So this is a kind of, YouGov doing a service to sleepy Labour voters to wake up and smell the coffee,
or is it? There may be many people who want to spring leader.
Exactly. What does this say? This one single poll say?
The first thing it says is the moronic MPs who nominated Jeremy Corbyn to have a debate.
It includes John Cruddas,
need their heads felt. They need their heads felt. They should be ashamed of themselves.
Well, hang on. You can say that. But then what you might say, this is actually
morons. They're morons, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is
that these do you accept there are Labour members and indeed people in the country that do support Jeremy Corbyn? I mean, it's not a chimera.
Political parties are full of suicidally inclined activists.
Okay.
And clearly some of our members are suicidally inclined. The reality is the largest single group, and I think I've not seen the figures for Don't Knows, one of the largest groups I know from all the campaigns.
20%.
They say one of the largest groups of members out there our don't knows who are thinking about the holiday, not about the election result.
No, wait a minute.
This though, these figures are disastrous for the Labour Party. There's no other way of describing it. Disastrous. And the consequence is that the other candidates for leadership have to decide who is the ABC candidate, anybody but Corbyn.
However, let's say they can't agree. Well, that would be a disaster. What you're suggesting either is that they will get together, they'll carve up shadow positions or whatever else, and they'll have one candidate even in the first run against Corbyn, or they'll do a slate.
No, there should be a slate. There'll be no withdrawal from this. The election campaign's been a disaster from beginning to end. There's no debate. There's only one analysis, a failed Bennite analysis from the 80s. The only opposing analysis is Liz's analysis, and whenever she puts forward an idea, the debate's closed down by Yvette and Andy. It's been the worst leadership campaign of many bad leadership campaigns I've seen in my
Thank you, John. But just finishing with you, Allegra, I mean, John says, and in fact you see, of course, this is not a long way off, it's to September, but as John said, we've got intervening holidays where people don't actually have their eye on the ball. And who is going to grasp this and shake it down? The Corbynites or the others?
I think the momentum appears to have gone from Liz Kendall's campaign, and she seemed to be the person who was the counterbalance to the Corbyn one. The other two are trying to scoop up the second and third preferences, and it seems to be a counsel for being very safe. So the problem is, in the fullness of time, it's basically shifted the Labour Party contest to the left.
Do you think, like John, that nobody will drop out, or could you see Liz Kendall dropping out if there was another poll that put it like this? Or she's
Liz Kendall is not a quitter.
Liz Kendall's not a quitter.
She's many things, she's not a quitter.
So they're all in for the long haul.
They're in for the long haul. The problem for Liz Kendall appears to be that she was running in a race, and the landscape within the party has changed.
Thank you both very much indeed.